want to be clear, I really like internal combustion engines. Electric cars are taking off slowly. I think for a lot of people, they're still concerned about maybe range. You can see regions with really good energy management like Norway. If I could have one electric car, it would probably be... I was actually thinking about buying a BMW i3.
Okay, first off, I guess welcome to everyone, and thank you for tuning in. This is different to the content that I've done previously, but a topic that's relevant, new, and ever changing. And we've got the privilege today of Andrew joining us. So I guess jumping right in, Andrew, tell us a bit about yourself, how you got involved in the world of EV.
Hey Jade, thank you so much for having me. Really excited to talk about electric cars. So this has been something I've been following, researching for the past probably going on like 4 or 5 years. I started off as a contributor at Inside EVs, which is an electric car news website, and I wrote for a bunch of other publications, primarily about electric cars. And I've done some engineering work in the space. I'm currently working now as a software engineering intern at Lucid Motors, kind of in the charging area, and worked at a few other places. And yeah, electric cars probably make up a good percentage of my personality.
Oh, that's good. I guess on that note, you believe in obviously their future, the difference between obviously internal combustion engines and the change to EV. I guess just a quick side note, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think I want to be clear. I really like internal combustion engines. I think they're really cool. You can, especially when you're like downshifting through the mountains on some curvy country road, you don't really get that feel you get in an electric car. But I would kind of argue that for like the vast majority of driving, electric cars are a lot better, because when you're just driving to work, it's like, do you need a manual transmission in a car that gets 12 miles per gallon? Because that's not always ideal. So I think there's definitely a place for electric cars, as there are hybrids as well. But for me, I think the electric powertrain is just so beautiful. It's just when you look at it, it's so simple, it's so elegant, and you can make massive horsepower. So yeah, I think that's kind of my fascination and draw for electric vehicles.
Yeah, love that. So I guess topic one, obviously EVs in South Africa we'll jump into, and kind of Africa as a whole. But in the world of EVs in the US, what are like some key trends at the moment? Where is it in obviously the process and future of EVs that you would say you guys are at?
Yeah, so I would say that electric cars are definitely taking off here. I think they're making up, at least last year, it was around 7% of new car sales. So there's definitely a lot of room to grow. So it's not like they're in Norway where they make up a good percentage of new car sales. So
Interesting.
Electric cars are taking off slowly. I think for a lot of people, they're still concerned about maybe range charging, because especially moving out here to California, is the charging network there's just simply more electric cars out here in California than there are on the East Coast. So finding a charging station is a lot more difficult, and that kind of exemplifies the need for having charging at your work or home. So here I can go to work and I can charge my car, which is really nice, for a discounted rate. So it's like, at that, it's probably around like maybe in the ballpark of $6 and probably around $6 to $10 to get maybe 250 miles of range of my Chevy Bolt, which is really affordable for California, where gas is like $5 a gallon. So I think that's a huge factor. But yeah, I'd say there's still hurdles for adoption of electric cars. Primarily just a lot of people maybe aren't familiar with the technology, and it requires a massive learning curve to drive an EV. So like a charge curve, which is really important, is, so maybe an electric car says your car will charge at 150 kilowatts, but that's usually in ideal conditions. So you might charge at 150 kilowatts for a little bit, and then it's going to taper down, and then people are going to be like, wait, my Toyota BZ4X is charging at 50 kilowatts right now. Why is it doing this when it says it should be doing 150? And then that could be a huge turnoff to someone buying an electric car, that you're going to have to wait extra time to charge it. So yeah, I think definitely charging infrastructure is still an issue for some people. I'm fine living with it because I'm passionate about the technology, so I'll wait 15 minutes to charge my car. like my Chevy Bolt that I'm driving now, because that charges really slow. Obviously, there's a lot of other electric cars that charge way quicker than that. But for me, I'm fine with it. I can accept that. But I think a lot of people, there's still a little bit of an inconvenience. And I think some products alleviate that, specifically Teslas with like supercharging networks. So yeah, I think there's still a hurdle to adoption, but there's a huge community behind electric cars that really support them and like them. And I think you can see that particularly with like Tesla fans, because they very passionate about the technology. So I think that's kind of infecting other people.
Yeah. And I guess to that point, the competition, I mean, Tesla's, I think globally the one that we're familiar with and dominating kind of the space from an outside perspective. But is it more competitive like that 7%? Do you see more manufacturers kind of taking share, or is it still dominated by Tesla?
Yeah, so I would argue, I think Tesla, I forgot, I haven't looked at the numbers recently, but Tesla is still the most popular electric car maker, and at least in the United States. So in this region specifically, there's tons of Teslas, especially like coming out to California, and even on the East Coast still, it's like there's so many Model 3s and Ys. They're just super popular because people love them, and they're great cars with good charging. But I'm starting to see a lot more electric cars hit the market that aren't Teslas. Specifically, I think Hyundai and Kia have really killed it with their eGMP platform. So it's like Hyundai Ioniq 5, Kia EV6, some of the Genesis vehicles as well. But like the Hyundai Ioniq 5 and 6 and Kia EV6 are just superb cars, especially when you compare them to like the ID4, Toyota BZ4X, all these other cars. So like, I think what we're kind of seeing is customers are choosing the really good electric cars from the not so good ones. And I think also with adoption is also price. So you have some electric cars that may not be that great, like the Toyota BZ4X, which is really not that good of a car, but you can get them on leases for like $150 a month at times, $199 a month. So really, really cheap leases on that. So then you're like, well, okay, I'm just driving 20 miles a day to work, but this is way cheaper than a RAV4. So I think definitely price kind of comes into play as well with some of these getting more non-Teslas out on the road, because for the same price in some cases BZ4X is more money than a Tesla Model Y, and that's kind of ridiculous when you have a car that's just objectively not as good. So, but now when you get one for under $200 a month on a lease, then it really kind of makes you think. And it's like, well, you can live with some of its shortcomings when it's just substantially cheaper.
And what are, I guess for people like myself who are ignorant to the space and it's really growing here, what are the big differences? I mean, used to internal combustion and a V6 and all these different kind of makes, models, turbos, naturally aspirated. What makes, I mean, is it just size of battery, the car you're speaking about? What makes it so far from the likes of a Tesla?
Yeah, so that's really interesting. So I think, at least when you look at all these electric cars, so we can look at two gas cars, for instance, right? We could say, like, pick out a Lamborghini Gallardo and a Toyota RAV4, and, like, fundamentally, they're two, well, if you at least look at the powertrain, they're completely different, right? You have one massive engine. It's just, there's not like, you don't look at those two engines and you're like, okay, there's some similarity there. But you can actually look at like Cadillac Lyriq and a Chevy Bolt, or maybe those are too close, but you could look at maybe a Porsche Taycan and any other electric car like a Chevy Bolt or something like that. And you look at the two powertrains and, well, fundamentally, they both have battery pack, or maybe we could take the Jaguar I-Pace actually, because they actually use very similar battery cells to the Chevy Bolt. So you got similar battery cells, and it's like, what's the only difference? The difference is just maybe the way the electric motor's tuned to deliver the torque, and also the design of the vehicle. So the thing is with electric cars, it's the real discernible difference is maybe just like the way the throttle is mapped to deliver power, and also the design of the vehicle. So there isn't as much difference in electric cars versus internal combustion. But that said, it's like you still get in like a Rivian with like quad motors, and it's just like it just changes the way you think, because it will drive completely differently. But I think at the fundamental level, there's a lot of similarities between electric cars, and I think that's one thing with these vehicles is like, say you get like the Audi Q4 e-tron and the Volkswagen ID4, same car underneath, and they're gonna drive relatively similar. So that is kind of one issue. Whereas with gas car engines, there's just so much more nuance between the way the engines function, and a lot of people do like that. And that is one thing you have to consider with electric cars, that a lot of them will probably drive more similarly. So just suspension, steering feel, stuff like that is what are going to be the main discernible differences.
Yeah. And on that, I mean, I'm a fan of stock cars, but for people that enjoy tuning, modifying, could you change some of these, like the makeup of it, map it differently, or you get it and kind of it is as it is?
So I think like still in the nascent phase of where we are with electric cars is not really, but I've seen like some people on like Reddit put like upgrade their batteries in their Nissan Leaf. So like you can maybe get extra battery cells and just throw them in the trunk of your car, stuff like that. So that would be more range. That, I mean, I think upgrading the power would be very, very difficult, just because you're gonna have to find a different motor that fits right in, works with motor mounts, all that stuff. So it's not a huge thing, but I think where we will be seeing this go is kind of more software modifications. So like Tesla, for instance, and I believe Polestar, you can now unlock more motor capacity with the cars. So you can just like pay, I think in Tesla it's like around $2,000, and then you can like increase your horsepower by, I've heard up to 100 horsepower, and from feeling the difference, it felt substantially. But still the makeup of the car is still the exact same. So you're still getting that motor, which could make that much horsepower in the beginning, but they just software capped it, and then they give you a little bit more access to it, and then also change the throttle mapping. So the power comes on a little bit more quickly. So I think that could maybe be another area. And then obviously you'll have to consider, if you are doing some modification on your own, you could be risking damaging the battery long term if you're like just driving like crazy and it's creating a lot of heat. So I think there is some areas for like more software geeks to tune their cars, but it's definitely not the same as like strapping on a turbocharger or something like that.
I hear you. And then I guess in terms of regulations or laws, I know it's something I've seen in Europe. Even in motorsports, there's a push by, I think it's 2030, to have kind of all e-racing. What has helped in the US to move that 7%, if anything, in terms of regulations?
So I think regulations, the real important fact of regulations is, I think regulations that address an issue rather than propose a solution tend to do a little bit better. So I think a perfect example of that is back in the 60s and 70s when the California Air Resource Board was enacted, as well as the Clean Air Act of 1970. So those kind of two things kind of address the issue. So what was it? It was air pollution in Los Angeles. So just the geographic location of Los Angeles, get the ocean, mountains right there, it kind of creates an area where not a lot of the exhaust emissions from vehicles could escape into the atmosphere, and they're kind of trapped in this valley area. And basically the law was like, hey, this is an issue, so here's some things that I think we should do. So they wanted to lower emissions. They also mandated catalytic converters, which is huge. And then you could literally see the charts of air pollution in California after that law was enacted, and it was huge, because it's really bad to have all these noxious chemicals around and just lingering in the atmosphere in this local level where it's smoggy, it's terrible. So I think kind of laws that point out an issue and then find a way to address it, and kind of more allowing the market to figure that out. Because then going to the 90s, you get like the Toyota Prius, which is a huge step up. You're getting 50 miles per gallon compared to, I don't even know what the average was at that time, but probably 15, 20 miles per gallon. So you're getting massive efficiency increases. And so today we're seeing that, we're seeing also incentives with the Inflation Reduction Act. So you're getting $7,500 if you buy a new electric car built with battery components sourced from the United States, and $4,000 for used electric cars. So this is kind of a little different because this is more directly incentivizing a consumer to buy a certain powertrain vehicle, which does help for sure. So like, especially with a used car, maybe you're buying a Chevy Volt for $15,000 because that would qualify, and now the price comes down to $11,000. So when you're talking about that, that's like a huge monthly payment difference for someone buying a vehicle. So I think that definitely does have a play. The question is, I think we're up to around $1 billion in incentives given to electric car buyers in the United States this year. Is that worth the spending? Because I think people would be buying electric cars either way. I think the selfish version of me would be like, yes, that's good because I want to buy an electric car to get tax credits. But I think there is a valid point to letting the market decide. So I'm not sure if I totally have an opinion on it. So I think there is a positive to having the tax credits. There's also a positive to not having the tax credits. But maybe I'd be leaning towards we should still keep the tax credits. But then someone might argue, if someone buys an $80,000 Rivian, do they need a tax credit? So that is a valid point.
Well, I guess then moving to this side of the world,
what do you think?
Being I think for me it's also new. I mean, in South Africa specifically, there's no real regulations, laws, kind of rebates at the moment. So I think, as even you said earlier, I'm a massive internal combustion engine. The sound is all of the experience for me. So I'm like, man, as long as we can stay the way we are, we're happy. But nothing here currently is saying, man, we need to move this way. I think that's also another kind of whole conversation on the effects of both and the comparisons that again, maybe I'm ignorant to in terms of an EV car versus internal combustion, and long term, what are the genuine facts or figures on the effects on the environment. So I think if maybe I was more familiar with that, I would say, man, let's by all means find ways to incentivize, push, discontinue, or what have you. I think I'm pretty sure it's London, you've got like emission fees if you're going to certain places to discourage people going there. So it's not something here that I'm experiencing, but things that I've heard and kind of seen globally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so generally in the United States, even if you charge like an electric car on the grid, it's still going to be maybe around, like if you take the aggregate of United States grid energy and you have an average electric car like Pulsar 2 Bolt, it's going to take about like 4 to 5 years in which it will break even with a comparable gas car. So this is even taking into account the emissions from like the battery. So
wow.
At least here there is a benefit, and it will take about 4 to 5 years. But then after that 4 to 5 years, the electric car is going to be way better for the environment. And the really cool thing is you can even use like home solar. So then you can charge your car at home. So I think in that regard, like for energy, I think we should kind of enable a microgrid future where you can have battery energy storage systems, incentivize home energy, because I guess my issue with the tax credit, even though I generally support it, is we shouldn't just be throwing out electric cars onto the market, especially with people who may not be too familiar with technology. And I'm not saying that just because I see the people who have free charging just take up the charging stations and let their cars sit on there for a while, because that does happen. So I think, well, because you get like free charging and then you're just like, I'll just leave my car there for a long time and get up the free charging.
And that is, sorry to interrupt, is that everywhere? Is that a normal?
No,
is that standard?
It's not a huge issue. No, absolutely. Okay. So it's not a huge issue, but you still see it sometimes. So you got like people with like the Volkswagen ID4, because when they were new, you got like 3 years of free charging, and then the people would just be hanging out at the charging stations. good for them because they got a really good deal, because you're paying $5 a gallon for gas and now you can get by. But I think at least the incentives, in my opinion, and this has been addressed in the Inflation Reduction Act, but I think it should have been addressed more, is charging infrastructure. I think we should probably beef up the grids before we just throw a bunch of cars out on the market, especially with people who, an electric car will work best if you have somewhere to charge it at home. It's or at work. So I think if you have either of those two areas, an electric car is great for you. But maybe if you have an apartment and you're relying on public charging and you're driving a car like the Chevy Bolt that just is not good at public charging because you can't accept that many kilowatts. So a car like that is probably not ideal for you, especially if you don't have a place to charge it. So I think like electric cars do work best for people with homes and or apartments where they can charge their vehicles. So yeah, I guess that's kind of the thing for me with just the incentives overall, is we should definitely prioritize infrastructure like charging stations that are reliable, because there's still some issues there.
Yeah, and I guess with that, like, what are challenges that you've seen that have been relevant to the US, and challenges that maybe you could even see, things you've experienced or anything that you would think in Africa as a whole, but I guess specifically South Africa? How do we move forward and even get to the place you're at?
Well, where do you live? Do you live, like, how urban is the area? Is it like suburbs or?
So Durban, South Africa, and yes. So I mean, there's a couple charging stations, Audi's doing it, Jags doing it, but I mean, I could count how many I've seen between here and Joburg is probably 3. So they're around, but yeah, that's kind of where I live and stay.
Okay, because that seems kind of similar to, at least where I'm from, in like the Carolinas. Not so much Charlotte, which is a pretty big city, but like when you go up into just more of like the backwoods area, there's just not many charging stations. Well, I wouldn't even say backwoods, because it's even like smaller, like just more residential areas, even with small towns, but there's just not a huge need for charging stations there. So I guess that's the thing, because for a lot of people, you can live in a rural area and have an electric car, and you just charge at home. So you got a Tesla with 250 miles of range, charging stations 100 miles down the road, but all you're driving around, you just go back to your home to charge, so it doesn't really matter. And then if you just go on a road trip, then you just hit up the charger that's further away, because you wouldn't even need to charge if you're going on a road trip, because you just charge up at home, or it's cheaper. So yes, but I think definitely with some people in some areas, more, I would say it's more not the infrastructure itself, or it is actually more on the infrastructure itself, like just the reliability of the chargers. So like out here in my Chevy Bolt rental, because Hertz didn't provide me the charging cable, so I was public charging the car. I went to 6 separate EVgo stations, and out of which 1 worked.
Wow.
And that's really poor, especially when your battery's low and you need somewhere to charge. And this all could have been saved with just home charging if Hertz just gave me the cable with the car. And then now they're saying I can come over and finally get the cable, which is great, like a weekend. So I think the reliability is kind of a huge thing, because especially you go to a gas station, put in your credit card, and the gas station works 99.9% of the time. And I would say that's just like Tesla superchargers, because Tesla superchargers, I never had a single issue with Tesla supercharger. Wow. So you're like just driving the supercharger, well, except one, like the handle was kind of broken, but that's not the charger's fault. That's just someone probably dropped it on the ground. But you see that with like Tesla superchargers, you just drive your car in, plug in, charges really fast. You go use the bathroom, come back, and your car is probably ready to continue your trip, which is really nice because they just charge super fast. But then you go to like an EVgo charger, and it's like you need like a PhD in computer science to work the thing, because it's just ridiculous. And like, and I feel like I'm a pretty techie person, but it's just like it's just not it's not very user friendly. Whereas I think the thing is, if you want people to switch, which I obviously do, you just got to make it super simple and easy to use. So like Tesla superchargers, you plug in, it does a handshake with your car, and boom, it's charging.
Yeah.
And then you can do whatever you want for like next 10, 15 minutes. And then you come back and you got your car fully charged, which is really nice. So yeah, I think simplicity would be nice with a lot of charging stations, and just developing some general standards. And we do see some of that with like a lot of like plug and charge and stuff like that. So I think it's in the right direction, but still reliability is a little questionable.
Yeah, so there's a lot that my kind of audience, at least locally, would know to be true and understand and live in, of some of the challenges. I don't know if you've heard of load shedding at all.
But a little bit, yes.
So yeah, we have, and it depends. I mean, it depends on what stage and levels, but essentially we have our electricity is managed poorly throughout the country, and what's that has resulted in is to these block hours of no power. So I mean that's a massive red flag. At a place last year, up to I think it was 12 hours a day in Johannesburg, there was no power. So now, I mean, for the world of EVs, that's you can't function like that. The second, I would say, I see it being a potential issue is theft. I mean, obviously there's theft throughout the country at different levels. So, I mean, power stations, you name it. So obviously with this big infrastructure, I'd be intrigued to see as it comes and where they're putting it, how they maintain that those are looked after and obviously kept safe. But I think we as a country are away off from getting to a place where there's more obviously electric cars on the road. I think first and foremost because of the infrastructure and the investment from different manufacturers. As I say, there's probably 3 charging stations I've seen, actual places where you can go charge your car outside of home. And I mean, actual EV cars, plug-in hybrids has been a bigger move, and hybrids in general has kind of been the move in South Africa. But from a purely EV perspective, I think there was one Tesla brought to the country, and it was just like a show car. So that was the purpose or point of it. But yeah, I think there's a lot of challenges we will have and face in future. I mean, load shedding, not having power being the biggest. So it'll be interesting to see kind of in time what the landscape does and where it moves in South Africa and Africa as a whole.
Yeah, so I think you touched on a good point, because it's like you can see regions with really good energy management like Norway, and they're just electric cars are everywhere. And that's really brought on by, you just have great energy management. You have a lot of the energy is renewable, geothermal, which is really cool. And then you can kind of see that with like good energy policy will lead to more electric cars on the road. And I think that's something a lot of regions, even in a lot of areas in the United States as well. Like you look at like where I'm from, like Carolinas, you have lots of reliable energy, nuclear, hydroelectric, very little coal and stuff like that, at least in the area where I'm near. And so you've got relatively clean energy, and that's really good. And it just spurs a lot more, especially reliable energy that's cheap. So you're like paying 10 to maybe 15 cents a kilowatt hour for electricity. Wow. So that's really cheap. Whereas in California here, way more money. So yeah, I think if you can get reliable, cheap, clean energy as a backbone of your economy, then it's just natural that electric cars will follow.
Yeah. No, I completely agreed. And I think, I mean, it pretty much covers everything, at least that I wanted to ask, understand. I think, I guess in closing, anything from from your side that we haven't touched on? Anything else that you think's important to know or understand? And yeah, any kind of closing comments?
Yeah, so I think at least with some of the charging infrastructure, I didn't want to paint it so bleak here in California, and I'm still going to be driving an electric car. I don't think there's any way around that. But I think that like at least a transition to electric cars is something that I think is particularly fascinating because you just look at like internal combustion engines, they haven't evolved that much over the past, I mean, they've been on the road for over 100 years and you haven't seen a ton of change with them. So electric cars kind of took this to a different level. So you saw with a lot of gas cars, I mean, the engines are around 30% efficient. So you put in like 4 gallons of gas and you get to use just over a little over 1 to push you down the road. The other 3 are just burnt off as heat and emissions and stuff like that, which is pretty incredible. And then you look at an electric car and you can get upwards of like 90% efficiency, especially when you factor in regen. So I think as we progress in the 21st century to just being more energy efficient or just being more efficient with the resources that we have, I think electric cars are the natural step. So I think, yeah, just focusing on more efficient forms of transportation is key. And you can even use electric powertrains like with gasoline engines. So gas engines are already so efficient, or gas engines are already so inefficient that it's all right if you drive on the highway. You can drive 70, 80 miles per hour on the highway and you still get okay gas mileage because they're just so inefficient to start with. There's not much extra you're losing. But when you pair this with like an electric system, then you can have the benefits of an electric car for city driving, and then you got the gas engine for highway driving, which is really cool. So I think just the electric application it's so immense. There's just so many areas where we can put electric motors, and you see that with mild hybrids, you see that with regular hybrids, you see that with plug-in hybrids, and most notably we see that with electric cars. So yeah. I think it's just a matter of time before we start seeing hybrid or EV applications or we just start seeing this powertrain find its way into a bunch of different vehicles. So electric cars don't have to be the only one, but they happen to be one of the better ones. But yeah. I think it's just a matter of time before we see them integrating into more vehicles.
And I guess lastly, most importantly from my side at least, if you were to have any electric car and you had all the money, what's the one that you would have in your garage?
Ooh, okay, that's an interesting one. What would you do?
So and maybe just because of videos and hype and stuff, the Rimac Nevera.
Ooh.
I'd be just so intrigued to feel the power. I mean, I've watched races of it against SF90 Ferraris and stuff. I think just the raw power of EVs fascinates me. So something like that would be like a dream to have and own and feel and experience.
Wow. Yeah, that would be pretty sick to drive a Rimac Nevera. Honestly, there's a lot of electric cars I really like, and for me, I tend to look at the price, right? Because it's like, we can get the Rimac Nevera, which does 0 to 60 in whatever it does, like 1.9 seconds, but then, you know, for $250,000, you could buy a Lucid Air Sapphire, and then the person's like, well, then you could spend $90,000 on a Model S Plaid, and then you just keep going down and down and down. Yeah. So, I don't know, I think I'd probably do... If I could have one electric car, it would probably be... I was actually thinking about buying a BMW i3 like earlier this month. Nice. And because they came down price so much, you can get like 2020s for like $15,000. It's by no means a good car to like rely on as your only vehicle, just because it runs through tires quickly. The tires are so skinny, you can hit potholes. It's a mess. But I think that is a vehicle that I just always have liked throughout ever, just because it's like... It was a vehicle that really was forward thinking in its time, and now you can kind of see it was like, oh, that was a nice attempt, because it was like made out of carbon fiber, stuff like that. So I think the i3, at least like sentimental value and importance in the electric industry would probably be that. So, yeah, I don't know about what my dream electric car would be because I have lots of vehicles that I think it could be. So, I mean, it would probably be a mix between Rivian, Lucid, Porsche Taycan, all those vehicles.
Oh, that's a good one. I forgot.
Yeah. So I don't want to irritate my employers, so I'll be quiet on the.
You gotta watch what you say.
Yeah.
Well.
But yeah, we'll go with. I'll do the BMW i3 as a safe choice. Wink, wink.
Love that. Well, I think just thank you again for your time. No, it's relatively early there, so I appreciate you jumping on. And yeah, I would love to see the feedback from everyone on this video, kind of see what they have to say, and maybe there's more questions and we can link up again and kind of find out what else we're missing or what else I could learn from you. But appreciate your wisdom and your time, and I look forward to connecting more in future.
Absolutely, Jade. Thank you so much. And you gotta let me know when you take an electric car for a spin.
I will, most definitely.